Welcome back to my channel. This video is a part of a monthly new moon series that I'm sending out to my newsletter subscribers this year. The theme of this new moon is asking us, are we sleepwalking toward a reality we don't want? This month's newsletter also includes a horary question from my audience, which asks, will I get the job I just interviewed about? Sign up for my free newsletter to get access to this video, and you'll also get a tutorial that I've created, which shows you how to track your planetary cycles using free software. Thank you for your likes and comments. I love hearing from you. Okay, so I'm going to start with talking about this new moon in general, and then I'm going to walk through a mundane chart set in Washington, D.C. So if you're not interested in politics in the US, you can just drop after I talk about the new moon in general. But if it happens to interest you, stick around and I will be talking about the political situation as I see it from this chart. Okay, so let's just talk about the new moon in general. So don't pay attention to any of the houses here. This is the Washington's chart. We're just going to look at the new moon in general. So this is the fifth new moon in the 9th degree and the second to last one at this degree. The final new moon at the 9th degree will be the March new moon eclipse at 9 degrees Aries. In case you missed my previous videos, the 9th degree is associated with Sagittarius, and with this energy comes an increased desire for expansion into new forms of knowledge, adventure, and freedom. The traditional ruler of Pisces is Jupiter, so this new moon has extra Jupiterian energy. It also comes with a slice of Neptune's veil as the modern co-ruler of Pisces. Think of it like this. Jupiter expands everything it touches. In Sagittarius, it's bold and it dreams big. It is a fire sign or yang energy. But Pisces is receptive or yin energy. With Neptune's, it adds a shimmery quality, a veiling to Jupiter. It expands but seduces and draws you in. Whereas Sagittarius is like diving headfirst into an experience without thinking about the consequences. Pisces energy can be more idealistic or dreamy, waiting for the natural flow to drive them forward rather than charging ahead into the night. It's the fairy tale, the story of the knight in shining armor coming to rescue you, or it's the tough mobster guy you think will protect you from the boogeyman. One can never know with Pisces sometimes. Sometimes we start with a dream of what could be, and that dream can be a mirage of sorts. Because if we faced the reality of what we have to give up to get there, we may not be inclined to go on that journey in the first place. Like I mentioned in my previous video about the Neptune North Node cycle, if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to check that out. If one is not conscious, Neptune can easily misdirect and lead one astray. Neptune is definitely tied to propaganda of all kinds. So pay attention to the information you're consuming today and ask yourself whether you can be absolutely certain that it's true. And this really reminds me of Byron Katie's work. If you haven't checked her out, I would encourage you to do so. She's always asking people, are you sure? Can you be absolutely certain that what you perceive is true? And especially about other people in our lives. So it's very helpful, I think, as a theme in this time period. Now, in her book, Moon Phase Astrology, Raven Caldera calls this the dreamer's moon. On the dreamer's moon, it's time for reading or writing fantasy or discussing utopian politics. It's not a time for practical action. People who are born under the Pisces new moon can have relationships that are problematic because they often go quietly along with what others want, and people can think they are amiable enough until they open their mouth. Then people think they are crazy. Unconscious, they can often be pushed into doing what they don't want to do. People tend to want them around because they want someone to listen to them, but they aren't often willing to return the favor. The Pisces story is about the movement toward and away from reality. Their inner worlds are sometimes much more desirable than the reality of what's out there. Now, I was born under this new moon phase, so I recognize this description in my experience. I have often described my process of amiably going along with someone until I wake up and find out that I'm headed in the wrong direction. My boundaries have been crossed, and it's no longer okay. It can be very disorienting for me, not only, for myself, but also sometimes for the people involved. They can be very surprised at my sudden vocalization, just like she mentions. But, I have an Aquarius sun and a Pisces moon. And so I have a dichotomy to me. And so once somebody crosses a boundary, I can completely cut them off without a warning. And so that can be very surprising to people. And it's something that I have to be careful about. So this new moon is applying to a square to Jupiter. You see this square here to the new moon. It's in a tense relationship with this traditional ruler. It really depends on where this specifically is in your natal chart. But if you have any planets at these degrees, I would say it is very personal to you, the 9th degree and the 12th degree, because it's going to aspect your personal chart very specifically. And so what I'm starting to see in the Jupiter and Gemini energy is this growth in multiple and conflicting realities that we are now subject to in the United States. And I think it's very challenging for us if we all kind of want to be on the same page, because depending on your belief system, your identity, and that's very political these days, you're either with a reality that's very pro the president, or you're trying to figure out what the hell is going on with the realities that are changing in even the mainstream media now that we have a new president. And it's kind of been a real stark change from the people who had been used to another reality, to be honest. When the Democrats controlled the government, we definitely had a more leaning toward the democratic reality. And so if you think about the media being controlled by one or the other, you can see that very clearly now that it has been, and maybe even going toward a more starker difference now that there are a lot of tighter controls on the media from the president's perspective. But it's really going to depend on your politics. But anyway, I wanted to talk about that from this new moon, really trying to figure out what's real and what's not. And there's a tension there very clearly in this new moon. And since this new moon is in Jupiter's exaltation, it might be a sign that we may dream of reuniting our vision of a utopian world. And maybe people are starting to think, well, what does that look like? And how can I figure out how to get on board with this other vision? And I think there might be a reluctant acquiescence to move toward this united vision, especially if your livelihood kind of depends on you playing nice with the current environment that we find ourselves in, or how can I get something accomplished in this current environment without this polarization happening, without losing my business or access to funds that my family needs? And this is the question you should ask yourself before you do this. Is this direction life sustaining? Will it sustain my spirit in a way that's going to benefit me in the long term? Is it going to be nourishing to my spirit, or am I going to have to compromise myself too much? And is it going to bring me into a reality that's not life sustaining? And I feel like we're kind of all in a fog right now, at least from the United States perspective, amiably playing along with what's happening. And some of us, I know, aren't, but some of us are paralyzed and not really knowing what to do and not really having the energy really to face what's up against us. And maybe we're enjoying the promises of a better future, not realizing what's really happening. And when we collectively wake up, it might be a rude awakening for some of us. What dreams are you dreaming leading up to this new moon? Are you getting lost in your inner fantasies of where we're headed? Do you need to wake up to the realities that are happening around you before you get pushed into something you don't want to be pushed into? I think you should be asking yourself that question, because if you don't wake up now, it's going to probably bite you eventually, and it will be very personal to you. Sometimes these changes, you don't really wake up to them until they're personally impacting you. And I've seen this a lot, actually, in this time period, as I've been fighting various things in my personal life way before this current reality has hit us. So how do you want to act in this new reality? How do you want to show up as a leader during this time? We so desperately need leaders right now. People with value systems that are beyond what is going to give you more power and access to more money and resources. Now, we all have to feed our families and we all have to stay safe. Ask yourself, what is worth it at the end of the day? And what is going to sustain you and your family for the longer term when you think about where you want to head personally in your community and your family? Okay, so I'm going to end there from the personal perspective. I'm going to start analyzing this from the mundane perspective. So if you're interested in that, stick around. Okay, so let's talk about this from a mundane perspective. Now, this chart is located in Washington, D.C., so we could look at the political environment and what's happening in politics right now from a symbolic perspective. So before we begin, I wanted to point out the repetition we've seen in the past two moon charts of this 1 degree Libra Aries axis. You see, I've circled it here. It's on the ascendant descendant. Now, this is the last new moon we will see this repetition until Saturn and Neptune hit these degrees, starting with Neptune at 1 degree Aries in late April. This time, I wanted to look at the Sabian symbols for these degrees. Now, the first house is representative of us and how we are as a nation. It's our identity. And the Sabian symbol for the Libra side is a centered sense of self as a creative power. The power to create new realities is real and so potentially dangerous. It must be rooted firmly in our awareness of who we are. So the question that we are asking ourselves, or what we should be asking ourselves, is who are we as a country? And for the Aries side, it's about adjustment to feedback, being able to see ourselves objectively from another's viewpoint. How are we impacting the other with our actions to create this new reality? So the new moon in Capricorn was before Trump was inaugurated, but after he was elected. So you see, we have the North Node at 1 degrees Aries. It's right on the midheaven of this chart, along with Neptune. And you see that Aries was intercepted here in the 10th house. So it's where we're going, but Trump was definitely ready to roll at this time, but he didn't have the ability to move forward because he was not inaugurated yet. And so we see this energy as the future. We're not really quite sure what's going to happen at this time, but we see ourselves going toward that direction. Now, the ruler of the North Node, Aries, is Mars, and it was retrograde here in the first house in Leo. And if you know Trump's chart, he has his Mars in Leo, but it's at a later degree. It's very interesting that it was in this first house. But again, Leo doesn't really rule the first house. It's ruling the second house. But here he is, he's still making some noise. And it's opposing this Pluto in Aquarius here in the 7th house. And it's interesting because this is what everyone's talking about as the tech elite plutocracy. And I think during this times there might have been some negotiations that were happening with the tech elites themselves. And then the ruler of the South Node is here in the 8th house. It's Venus in Aquarius. And this is also very tied to this theme about this tech elite. And also, I think this was very demonstrative of what we were talking about, our individual rights versus the rights of the community, and the rights of the individual versus the rights of the political environment that we find ourselves in and the restrictions that we find ourselves in. And I think, like I said, Trump's team was raring to go, but they could only do so much before he was inaugurated. And Venus in the 8th house in Aquarius, there's a clear desire from the Trump team to break up the current reality of the United States and their partnerships and find freedom and opportunity in other ways. And they really thought that they had a better idea of how to maintain our world power. And so I think that was very clearly demonstrative in the time period before the inauguration. And then we get to the new moon in Aquarius, and here you see again, we've got this repetition in the February new moon right after the inauguration. The 1 degree Libra is on this 8th house cusp, and then you see this 1 degree Aries on the 2nd house cusp. Now, this is our money, our interests, our banking system. And the North Node and Venus and Saturn and Neptune are intercepted here in this 1st house. And there's a lot of behind the scenes maneuvering happening with the new moon in the 12th house. But as far as this 1 degree Libra Aries axis, in February, Mars went out of bounds. It was still retrograde, but it was raring to go. They really wanted to minimize the government and to really do, like we've seen that they've done, is to shrink it really quickly. And what happened was that we saw Musk come in and start to do what he did to Twitter, which is take control and to start implementing things that he didn't really have the right to do, the power to do, but started to do them anyway. And so this is the really the immature energy and the destructive energy that's happening in our government institutions with Mars there. And that was about, okay, well, we want to control the money that's going out to our international parties. And Venus is here in its exaltation. It's about diplomacy and it's about peace. And since it rules the 3rd and 8th house, we see that we're confronting our trade partners and we're confronting our international partnership where we used to have really good standing. Now it's coming under review with the Saturn here right next to it. Okay, so let's go back to this new moon and talk about it from the perspective of what's happening now. As we've already spoke about, we see that the 1 degrees Libra is on our ascendant. And the ruler of our ascendant is Venus, and it has now gone into Aries, and it's in the sign of its detriment, and it's in the 7th house. And the Sabian of this degree speaks to the ruler of a nation. So one could argue, as the 1st house ruler, it represents our president in this chart. It also speaks to the power of discipline. Venus is ruled by Mars in the 10th house here. And so we've gone from Mars being retrograde in the 6th house and causing a lot of havoc in our government institutions. And now it's gone in to the 10th house and basically represents what's happening at the executive branch. It's still out of bounds. And so there's a lot of things that are happening that people say are outside of the executive branch's rights overreach, basically. So that's what Mars looks like in the 10th house. Now, I wanted to speak to Venus 3 days after this new moon. Venus will go retrograde in Aries. Everyone's eye is on our leader. And what some see as a clear overreach by the executive branch with this out of bound Mars, our role as a leader of the rest of the world is coming under intense scrutiny right now. So far, with aggressive trade war escalations, pushing the idea of acquiring nations and land that belong to other countries, pulling back international aid while scrapping international bribery laws, the image of the U.S. as a moral leader is changing. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? All I can say is that it is seeming to create a lot of ill will in the world, and that it will most definitely have long-term consequences that we can't even foresee right now. Now, there are some that insist that this is the right way to go, that the U.S. needs to demonstrate its strength as a country again, that it's been too weak, and that people have taken advantage of us. And so that's what the backlash is about. That's why we voted in the person that we voted in from the Republicans' perspective. And that is clearly indicative of the Aries energy we have been moving toward since the North Node went into Aries. And we will see Neptune and Saturn go into Aries in the summer. And so we are preparing for that Aries energy. It's already happening. And I wanted to point out, too, that here we are with Chiron on the US's chart degree, and we're having a Chiron return. We're also experiencing a Pluto return. Pluto is in the 4th house. And so Chiron is about our wounds as a country. And we're really seeing this played out on the political stage. And some say this Chiron wound is about toxic masculinity and our history of slave ownership. So we're seeing this very much demonstrated right now in the world as we get rid of DEI programs that are trying to create some more equality in our institutions, which have not been very equal. And now we're going back toward this idea of meritocracy, this fantasy that anybody can make it in the United States with hard work and effort. And we know that that's very rare and hard to do. And so we're going backwards, basically, and we're revisiting some of these themes in a very demonstrable and extreme way. But if you understand human design and you know about the prophecies there, you know, we're going toward this place where we're having a breakdown in our institutions, and we're going into a new theme that is going to be very individual. And so when people experience these broader changes, they cling to the extremes because they think these fantasies around who's going to provide for me, and this person, this tribe leader is going to provide for my family. And so I'm going to trust that they provide. And whether they do or not is up for question. I guess it depends on how you fall in line with what they want you to fall in line with, as far as them supporting you and your family. So the new moon from this perspective is in that 6th house, which is about our institutions, our labor unions, the health of the country, the health institutions. And the Sabian symbol of this new moon speaks to attaining the highest level of responsibility that you can imagine. And I wanted to read something from James Burgess's website. He has a great website on the Sabian symbols, and I just love his Sabian descriptions. And so check out his website when you get a chance. The many tend to find a minimalist approach to community service, offering as little back as possible, begrudging their taxes, and avoiding volunteering. Others do their bit and try to behave responsibly. The very few are intent on mastery and are self-directed to do whatever needs to be done immediately and competently as a way of life. These are the people who discover that life offers a whole dimension unknown to the rest. Living in this dimension is incomparably more profound and satisfying. It is, in essence, nothing more than an attitude of mind, yet it is enough to smooth one's path and open unimaginable opportunities. So what this new moon is asking, I think, of us is who among us is going to take a stand for our country's model of leadership in the rest of the world? What kind of example are we setting? And are you going to take a stand in your community? And are other people going to take a stand in their community? Now, I was following somebody on Mastodon, Jeff Atwood. He's somebody who made his name in the tech industry, and he's fighting for this American dream. And he said something about VCs who were good VCs, that they needed to kind of make some noise during this time. And I made this comment, well, are any VCs good? Because I'm so jaded at the VC industry right now, because it seems like a lot of them are really out for making money and little else. They don't have any values as far as what the harm that they're doing to companies and to people who are employed by these companies. And he said, no, there are good ones. They're just being very quiet about what they're doing. And so it's like, well, they really do need to stand up, because it feels like we don't have a lot of people with values standing up for what's right. Now, the moon rules the 10th house with this Mars here. The Sabian symbol for Mars is about growing up and about assuming a mature role of responsibility within the community. The moon can be considered the people from a mundane perspective. Mars is applying to a trine to Saturn, and Saturn is here sitting in the 6th house. And the attention of the people is on the president's actions, which have been clearly out of bounds and acting in a way that is considered by some as unlawful. And Mars is about protection. It is stoking a lot of fears and aspecting Mars. It's another malefic. It's the ruler of the 4th and 5th house. It's trying to focus on overcoming its current difficulties. But Mars is at the midpoint of the new moon, and Uranus is sitting here in this 8th house. And so it is about shaking up our international partners. And it's also ruled by Venus here. It's ruled by our nation's leader. And it's showing really that there needs to be more care, as the shakeups that we're experiencing can easily cause more serious damage to the executive branch and the country at large. You know, these things that we're doing have longer term consequences. And we're taking a big risk right now in putting our country in a financial disaster. The cycle usually has a recession during this time. So we're taking a big risk. And are we going to have a serious recession, or are we going to save ourselves from this recession by taking a strong arm approach? We will see. But Jupiter here is, like I said, it was intense relationship with this new moon, and it is intercepted in this chart. The 9th house is ruled by Venus again. And so this 9th house Jupiter is usually about the judicial branch, and they're kind of stuck because of all of these things that are happening that a lot of people consider to be unlawful and creating a constitutional crisis. So even if there are many that are giddy about the speed at which things are being done, the chaos that it's creating is causing many long-term complications, especially to the places that the Republicans' base is concentrated, because the slapdash approach that they're taking to taking out the funds or killing the AISD and killing the research grants and things like that are actually very focused in some of these red states. because among the top 20 states that take more money from the federal government than they sent in taxes, 13 are solidly red states that voted for Trump in the last 3 elections. And meanwhile, the top 5 states and 9 of the top 10 that send more money to the Treasury Department than they receive voted for Democrats in the last 3 presidential elections. A lot of the colleges and the research that's being done in the Democratic states, they're well funded. And the ways that the Republican states get money is kind of from these programs that they're decimating. I'm sure there's going to be some balancing going on, but it's not actually doing them any favors right now. And so it looks like they're kind of trying to figure out the balance of where they should take a stand and where they shouldn't. And there's also this balance of keeping the market steady and this risk of inflation. We already see that inflation rose already, and there's more retaliatory trade tariffs that are happening right now that's causing a lot of havoc in the market. So right now, I think there's a balancing act, but Jupiter and Mercury, which is usually indicative of the media, are in mutual reception. So there's kind of an opportunistic approach happening, a careful opportunistic approach about how to manage the outcry to what's happening in the politics. I think people have to be careful about speaking out because of the retaliation that's happening and the control that's happening behind the scenes, the mafia control about who gets money, who doesn't. I mean, that's how it looks like from the outsider perspective, and certainly from my perspective. Okay, so just to talk about this really quickly from a higher level, this is a Western-oriented chart. It's cadent with mostly water. There's both cardinal and mutable energy. So it's reiterating the early themes that there seems to be a lot of focus on our partnerships and our institutions, big declarations that are happening from day one, these kind of PR pronouncements from the executive branch about what they're doing, these executive actions, which some of them are not legal and not legally binding, but these declarations that they're putting out, these sudden starts and stops, stirring up emotions and security fears without any concrete plans materializing. It seems that this new moon, we are all still caught up in this drama of the current political theater. And I think there's been people from the elite liberal side that's been telling people to calm down. There's a lot of distractions in the media right now. There's a lot of things that are happening that will not materialize. But I think there's a fine line, because there have been a lot of things that have started to materialize specifically. And so I think, yes, we have to be very careful about what we put our energy into, but we also have to decide where we want to lead and where we want to focus our vision to create an alternative storyline to what's happening on the national stage, to figure out where we want to step up, where we want to take our own leadership despite what's happening in Washington, and decide, okay, well, how can we step up for the greatest good for all? There are good people here. There's a lot of good people that have higher values than simply money, who also want to help those that are not as inclined to prosper in this environment. And where are we going to place our dreams, and also kind of wake up to where we're headed, and to how can we take a stand where it's necessary to take a stand so we're not headed toward destruction. I think it's very important. I do think I want to point out that the South Node is on the fixed star Alkaid, and it's actually going to be a little bit more serious in the chart of the eclipse, because Neptune is also on the fixed star Sheit during that time. And so we really have to look out for natural disasters related to water. And so there's also a need to surrender to a certain amount, but look around, and see who can need help and who can you give help to. And so we'll see. I'm recording this on February 13th. It's quite early. I might have to do another recording depending on what's happening. But I wanted to start this video in case I didn't have a chance to come back to it. I also wanted to mention again that if you want access to the horary video that I spoke about, you can sign up to my newsletter. I'll link it below, but it's just my website. You could just sign up there and you can get access to this horary chart. And if you stayed around this long, I appreciate you and I appreciate your support. Thanks. Bye.